Hello guys and welcome to this lesson. We're gonna be looking at CSS floats, the inline and the block, and then align. And you would have already noticed that we have talked about these in our previous lessons, but I'm just gonna dedicate some time and just explain this a little bit further. So I'm just gonna go to the code section and then we're gonna take some examples and see how these look like. So the float property is mainly used for positioning and formatting content, right? For example, an image to the left of text or the image to the right of text in a container, right? So we are looking at a container and we are looking at some text and some image, and you want to determine where to position the text and where to position the image. So you can use the float property to set these. And there are various some values that we'll be looking at will be left, right? Meaning that you want the element to float left of its container, right? If it's set to right, you want the element to float right of its container. And if it's set to none, the element will not float, right? It will be displayed just where it occurs in the text, right? So this is usually the default, right? So if you don't set these values, the default is set to none. And then we have the inherit value, and this the element inherits the float value of its parent. So we'll be taking a look at that. So I have an example here. This is a simple HTML, and I got this from W3 Schools to make it easy. I have a P paragraph here, and in the paragraph, I have an image. So I have a picture called orange, right, which I just got from the internet. And so in this P, first I have a paragraph saying, in this example, the image will float to the right of the paragraph, right? And then I have a paragraph again, and I have an image inserted in the paragraph, right? And then I have a style that constricts the width and the height to 170 pixel by 170 pixel, right? Good. So I have a bunch of text, which is my lorem text holder, just to give me some text, dummy text. So I have this. So if I refresh this, this is how it looks like. You can see this is the default uh, floating positioning, right, of text and images in a container. Good. So by default, uh, the image is placed wherever it occurs. So you have this text on top of it, and then we have the image, and then we have the lorem, right? So that's why you see it embedded in the text. But we can also float this uh, example. So let's try and float the example. Good. So in the style section, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna target my image because that's what we want to float. And I'm gonna say float to the right. Good. So when I refresh this, you can see that the image was pushed to the right of the text, right? If I had said float to the left, and I refresh this, you can see that it floated to the left of the text. If I had said no floats, no floats, well, sorry, if I said none, which means no floats, and I refresh this, you can see that it's the default behavior, right? So I am gonna float this left, sorry, I'm gonna float this left because this looks way nicer. Okay, and then there's a final thing that I want us to do. I'm trying us to float divs that are next to each other. So I'm gonna create some space here, and I'm gonna add 3 divs, div1, div2, and div3. And I'm gonna style these. Okay, so I'm gonna style this. Okay, so I'm gonna style the div. Just say I want all the divs to float left, and maybe add a padding of 20 pixels. Okay, good. And then, so you can see that these floated to the left. Just say I change this to right. I want you to see how it looks like. It's gonna float to the right. Good. And that is not what I wanted. I meant this one to the right. And if I refresh this, you can see that it floated to the right of the space available or the container available. Okay, just so we can see it properly, I am going to target them individually. So that div1, I'm going to set the background to green. And then maybe I can just copy this. And there's something wrong with my mouse. God. Okay, let me just type it in. So I'm going to target a div2, and I'm going to set the background to yellow, right? And then finally, my third div, which is the div3, I'm going to set the background to red. Good. Okay, so if I refresh this now, you can see uh, it more clearly. So then if I float this to the left again, okay, I'm sorry, this div to the left and refresh this, you can see it floating to the left. Okay, so when we use the float property as we have done, and we want the next element um, below, not on the right or left, we want it to come below it, what we have to do is that we have to use the clear property. So the clear property actually specifies what should happen to the element that is next to a floating element, right? So if you are floating a div and you want the next div to go below it, you would have to use the clear property, and we will take a look at that. There are various values that you can use, right? The first one is none. That is, the element is not pushed below, left, or right of the floated element, right? This is the default, right? So the element is not pushed below, left, or right floated element, right? This is this is the default implementation. So if you don't set it up, that's how it's gonna act, right? And if you say left, the element is gonna be pushed below, left of the floated element, right? And if you say right, it's gonna be pushed below and right of the floated element. And if you say both, the element is pushed below both left and right of the floated element. And if it inherits, then the element would inherit a clear value from its parent. Okay, so that is the values that we are going to be looking at. So when clearing floats, you should match the clear to the float, right? If an element is floated to the left, then you should clear to the left, right? Your floated elements will continue to float, but the cleared elements will appear below it on the web page. Good. So we should take an example so this is so much clearer. So with this, I am just going to copy these two divs. I'm going to create two divs, one below the other, and I'm going to call this div 4 and div 5, right? And I am going to uncomment this out because I don't want the float to affect all divs now. Okay, so let me just show you. Okay, so I have my div 1 and div 2 right down here. Oh, sorry. This should be div 4 and div 5. So there's no floating going on, right? Okay, so if I style this up, I'm gonna say I want to style div 4, and this time what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna float div 4 to the left, and I'm gonna add a padding to this, maybe 10 pixels, and I'm gonna set a border so we can, which is what, maybe 3 pixels, solid red, maybe solid green. Okay, so just so we can see, this is my div 4, and because it's floating, the next element naturally floats next to it. Good. But in this case, we are going to use the clear on the div 5, and so I'm going to create the div 5 style, div 5, sorry, and in there I'm going to have same thing. I'm going to have my padding, 10 pixels, my border. Oops, what am I doing? Okay, so let me do it right. I'm going to have my padding, 10 pixels, and I'm going to have my border, 3 pixels, solid yellow, it's fine. And then I'm going to have the clear, and I'm going to clear this to the left. Good. So now when I refresh this, you can see that this jumped to the bottom left of uh, this one right here. So this is what the clear button does. So it moves the div 5 below the floating div 4, right? Because the 4 was floating, right? So because we use the clear, and it's gonna move it below, but which direction it moves it below depends on left or right. So it's gonna now move it left of the floating. So it's gonna move it below div 4 and left of div 4. Oh, so uh that is what this is doing. You could also move it right if you wanted to, but that is what this does. So next, moving forward, we talked about display inline and display block in the previous lessons, but we haven't really talked about display being inline block at the same time. So compared to display being inline, the major difference is that the display inline block allows you to set a width and a height on the element, right? So if you define something to be inline block, you can set a width and a height. You can't do that with inline. Okay, So also with display being inline block, the top and bottom margins are respected, but with just display is equal to being inline, they are not. Okay, and comparing that to block. So compared to display block, the major difference is that display being inline block does not add a line break after the element. So the element can sit next to other elements. So remember when I said block elements always start on a new line and takes up the entire space of the that it has. Okay, with inline block, this doesn't happen, right? There's no line break afterwards, so you can have elements sitting next to each other, right? So let's just take an example, and one example just to highlight what we are talking about. Okay, so guys, I have three divs that I just added. I have my div uh, showing inline, right? And I have H2 showing inline block and one that's showing just block. We're gonna show the difference, right? So I just put a bunch of lorems, right? And then added a span to show my inline, right? And classes for all of them that we are going to style. Great. So if I refresh this, this is just how it looks like. You have your inline, you have your inline block, and then you have your black. So let's go ahead and style this. Okay. So the first one that we are going to style will be the span dot a class, right? So with this one, we're going to do the display as inline, okay? And this is like, this is the default for a span, right? So nothing has changed, but we're going to give it a width of 100 pixels, a height of 100 pixels. We're going to give it some padding, 5 pixels. We are going to give it a border, 1 pixel solid blue, and background color of um, orange. Okay, so that is the span A, and we're going to do that for span B, and it's easier if I just copy span B and span C. Okay, so for span B, I'm going to have the inline block, right? 100 pixel by 100 pixel 5 1 solid blue, and I'm going to have yellow, right? And then for my span C, I'm just going to have the display set to block, right? And then we have the 100 pixel by 100 pixel with a 5 pixel pattern, 1 pixel solid blue, and then background color of orange. So we have the sets. So guys, when I refresh this, okay, you can see that with the inline block, right, the the top and bottom margins patterns are all respected, right? You can see the patterns. These are all respected, right? You can see the top pattern, all that it's respected. But with the, and that is the same with the block, right? The patterns are respected. But with the inline, this is not the case. Also, with inline, it doesn't respect your width and your width and height settings, right? It doesn't even see it, right? So the inline doesn't allow you to set the width and the height, but it allows you to set it with inline block. And compared to the block, uh, the inline block does not add the line break, right? So you can see that they are next to each other. But with a block, it takes up the whole block of space, and so the next one has to come down, right? So that is the major difference between the three. So let's now talk about the horizontal and vertical align, right? How do we center align elements, right? And that depends on whether we are talking about block elements or not. So for block elements, like these ones that we have here, in order to center align it, you can just set the margin to auto. We talked about this previously, but I'm just going to mention it again because the margins will be spread again, evenly between your left and your right. So for example, if you wanted to center these, all I need to do is to add margin and set the margin to auto, right? So when I refresh this, you can see that this is properly centered in the middle. To center the text uh, inside an element, you have to use what we call the text align. So it's still with this block. Let's just add the text align and then say center, right? And so I'm expecting the text to get centered. So you can see now that the text in there has been centered, the horizontal center, right? So you can see that the vertical center, it's not there, but horizontally, it's been centered horizontally. You can also use Flexbox to do some of these alignments. And in order to, we have a whole lesson on Flexbox. So this is just going to be uh, a little explanation on it, but for detailed, you have to go to that lesson. And so for now, in order to use Flexbox, first we have to change the display type to Flex. And this is uh, only supported uh, on earlier it's only supports it in earlier versions of IE, right? So if you have IE 10 and earlier, it might not be supported. So you need to be careful. Okay, so now display is called flex, and I'm gonna say justify my content. I want to center this, and then I'm gonna align items to the center. Right? So if I refresh this, you can see that this is centered. Okay, so this is another way you can do it. We have a whole chapter on Flex and Flexbox, so we would still be going over this. So thank you guys for watching and see you in the next lesson. Bye.